An increasing global population, booming e-commerce, climate change, and congested megacities. Sustainability has become a prerequisite for doing business. Imagine what the world will look like 10 years from now. We want to offer solutions that are 100% safe, 100% fossil-free, and 100% more productive than today, because that will allow us to meet a growing need for transport while staying within the boundaries of what our planet can sustain. Nobody knows exactly what the future will look like, but we're eager to make it a great one.
Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and a very warm welcome to the Mobility Transformation Forum hosted by the Volvo Group. My name is Peter Campbell. I'm the Global Motor Industry Correspondent at the Financial Times, and it's a great pleasure to be with you this morning. We're delighted you can be with us, whether you're here in the room at the magnificent Museum of Fine Arts here in Brussels, or you're joining us on our global live stream. We have a morning of discussion and debate ahead of us, and then some technology demonstrations outside afterwards. Over the course of the morning, we're going to be hearing from leaders from across the industries that all have a pivotal role to play in the transformation. From industry, from energy, from logistics, from finance, and of course from policy as well. And it's only by working together that we can hope to navigate through the changes that are coming. As we all know, there are many changes coming to the industry. Each of them on their own would be enough to disrupt the sector you all know very well what they are: digitization, autonomy, and of course, decarbonisation. But they're all coming at once, and they're forcing all of the companies that serve this industry to think about changing their business models starting from today. So when people say the world's automotive industries and logistics and transportation industries are at a fork in the road, that is in fact far too simplistic. They're entering a labyrinth with decisions and choices, and a labyrinth of which no one has a map. No one has the answers to the strategic decisions that have to be taken in the next few years. And so that's why it's important that we have events such as this, where we can bring people from across the world and across the industries to discuss these changes together. And so with that, I'm delighted to introduce our first speaker. He's the CEO of Volvo Group. Please welcome to the stage, Martin Lundstedt.
So, thank you very much for the warm applause. First and foremost, dear Minister and honorable guests, ladies and gentlemen, it is a pleasure to have all of you here in the room, but also following us live across the globe on our live stream here for the Mobility Transformation Forum 2023. And of course, it is a real pleasure for us at the Volvo Group to be in Brussels today for this special showcase. And we will actually try to be as tangible as possible, since Europe in particular needs to be a little bit more tangible when it comes to the execution. And of course, it's an honor to do so during the Swedish presidency of the Council of the European Union. And in that regard, I'm particularly happy to welcome our Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Energy and Climate, Ms. Ebba Busch, that will address us a little bit later here also. Peter, you were talking about the fork in the road. That is one of my favorite quotes, by the way, so this is not planned in the script here, but you remember Alice in Wonderland when she's coming to this fork in the road, and she's looking at the cat there, and the Cheshire cat with a particularly peculiar smile, and she's asking him or her, I think it wasn't him, which way should I go? What direction? And he is saying, where are you heading? And she's saying, I don't know. Then the cat is saying, then it doesn't matter. And hopefully this morning we can actually clarify some of this, what matters for real here. Because the reality is that we are in the midst of a profound transformation for mobility, transportation, but also infrastructure. And we know that infrastructure and transportations are needed in a prosperous society. It will continue to increase across the globe, but it needs to be considerably more sustainable in order to cope with the planetary boundaries. In the Volvo Group, at the Volvo Group, we are investing heavily in different technologies and technology streams, both when it comes to the green transition, but equally important, of course, for the digital opportunities to accelerate the green transition. As you did see on the move, we are talking about the 3 times 100 as our aspiration. 100% safe, a true part of the Volvo DNA, both for our colleagues across the globe, but also upstream and downstream partners. 100% more productive, in order to utilize our common resources in a much better way. And there is enormous opportunities for that, but also 100% more fossil-free, obviously. And it will require a cooperation in different shapes and forms that we have never seen before, both upstreams and downstreams. And that is the whole idea about this session today, that we will not only talk about our so to speak, vertical or piece of the value chain, but together how we actually can transform this into a truly sustainable transportation system. Because it is a societal issue, transforming mobility. The way people and goods move must become greener, but also smarter. Mobility must also remain accessible, inclusive, and affordable to all. In one word, truly more sustainable. And to achieve the European Green Deal ambition of climate neutrality by 2050 while remaining inclusive, we must, as Peter said, work all together. In short, and listen carefully, the era of silos is over. And we still have an operating model in this city, in the European governance, that is actually fostering silo thinking. And that will not do anymore. And we need all to step up to take the holistic end-to-end approach. This is the reason why we have invited here today leading, and I'm super happy to have all our leading representatives from the energy and logistics sectors, but also influential players from government and finance to see and to discuss how we can join forces. Because partnership is the new leadership. And by that we mean that we need new, open-minded and innovative way of cooperating to accelerate the pace of change. We need to have a coordinated move from a brown, fossil-based platform, including all the different elements, up to a green platform. And if one of the elements in that coordinated effort is missing out, we will not make it happen and deploy it at scale, whether we like it or not. And such a revolution, because it's a revolution and not an evolution, goes hand in hand with investments in new technologies, but also infrastructure and energy systems. In short, how shall our European balance sheet look like by 2030? And who is responsible for that? Anyone who has thought about that? How South Korea or Singapore or Taiwan or many other countries systematically have been defining their innovative balance sheet when it comes to assets. Assets as we know it, but also assets as must happen in terms of skills and competence and capital deployment. The stakes are high for Europe. While pursuing our climate objectives, we must maintain and ensure the competitiveness of European industry for Europe's and for future generations' prosperity. And later this morning, you will have the opportunity to go outside and check out a broad lineup of zero-emission mobility solutions. You have most likely seen them when entering this room, but some of these innovations are still, you can say, in a conceptual phase, but much closer than ever. For example, fuel cells. When I started in 1992, it was 10 years away. And then 2002, it was 10 years away. And then 2012, it was 10 years away. I can tell you it's not 10 years away anymore. And the reason is simple. Technology, material development, carbon pricing amongst corporates and also society, etc. So it will happen. And also reality, storage, amongst others. But some of these innovations you will see conceptual phase, and some of them are already in scale and are stepping up in production as we speak. So it will be fun. And we have fantastic colleagues, experts, and leaders here that can explain anything to you. You see the small green scarves here. I will change later, but it didn't match my light blue shirt here. So no, yeah, I will have the green later on. Good. These tangible examples show how we have the edge when it comes to delivering us, but also the industry at large. But the guy who will actually make that happen with the whole team of fantastic engineers across the globe is our Chief Technology Officer, Lars Stenqvist. Please join me on stage here.
Great to see you all. Today you will hear about technologies that will drive us all forward. And let me start with one very clear statement. There is not one silver bullet. We will talk about several technologies in parallel. During the second half of this event, we will be outside, as Martin was into. We have brought some real-life, tangible solutions that you can touch and feel. Some solutions that are available today, and some solutions that are a little bit more oriented towards tomorrow. And I'm really excited already now to be able to show you some of the most important areas of change. Because it will be a lot of change for us as a company, for the transport industry, for society, for the planet. And change driven by technology. Martin, it's not boring to be the Chief Technology Officer right now.
It's fun. It's a lot of fun.
It's a lot of fun.
Good. And Lars is always referring to me as the Chief PowerPoint Officer, and he's the Chief Execution Officer. So let's see. But I try to be as executionable as I can as well. So ladies and gentlemen, again, warm welcome to the Mobility Transformation Forum 2023. Buckle up. Let's get started. We request you also to be active, to provoke, to object, to discuss, to support. Whatever you like, but we need to make it happen together. So most welcome.
Thank you very much, Martin and Lars there. Well, we're extremely pleased to be joined digitally by Ebba Busch, who is the Deputy Prime Minister of Sweden and the Swedish Minister for Energy, Business and Industry. And if the technology works, it's always nice when that happens. Minister, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much for handing over the word and for welcoming me in this setting. And happy to hear that I have a role model in Lars Stenqvist, because in the Swedish government, that's the role that I have compared to Martin then. But also thank you, Martin, for inviting me to this event today. Distinguished guests, dear friends, I'm so glad to be able to join this meeting albeit digitally. I actually came home from Brussels this morning. That means in the middle of the night. But I am so happy to be able to be with you in this forum. And I know that you are in for a treat this morning when you leave the building and are able to step outside. I am, to be honest, very jealous. I would like to thank the organizers, Volvo Group, for doing your part in the transition towards green mobility. Delivering on the green transition and putting long-term competitiveness on the EU agenda are top priorities for the Swedish presidency. And I would like to take this opportunity to address 5 main themes today. First of all, then, long-term competitiveness. Second, resilience. Third, making the EU a front runner of the green transition. Fourth, the Swedish industrial revolution. And 5, long-term conditions for businesses. So if you're ready, I'm ready, and we'll start with long-term competitiveness. With little more than a month left of the Swedish presidency, I'm actually proud to have accomplished what we have accomplished so far together in the Council. We have put a strong focus on strengthening EU competitiveness. It's been a rough couple of years tackling everything related to Brexit, and then a long-term pandemic with COVID-19, then the Russia's unlawful invasion of Ukraine, and an energy crisis on top of that. A lot of the EU agenda has been focused on acute errands, filling up a lot of the agenda. Now it was really time to put some of those long-term issues on the agenda as well. And we've really accomplished to do that. The topic has been discussed several times by the heads of state and has recently, just during yesterday's council meeting for competitiveness, also been given a lot of time. In March, the Commission presented a strategy for increased growth and productivity from 2030 and forward. The proposed next steps include introducing a process that will map and track progress within key areas. With this strategy and the proposed process, the EU's long-term competitiveness will always remain on top of the political agenda. Moving on to the second part then, resilience. During the past years, we have endured many challenges, as I spoke of earlier. And on top of that, high inflation together with the energy crisis. The EU has responded, I would say, rapidly and in a coordinated manner. Finding sustainable solutions to complex problems really remains our greatest asset. Our hearts beat for the people of Ukraine. Russia's unlawful invasion has made one thing perfectly clear. The time to phase out our independence on Russian fossil fuels is now. It's not tomorrow, it is now. Strengthening EU's resilience in times of crisis is crucial. Therefore, I am very pleased that we have been able to find an agreement on CHIPS Act. The act will increase EU's resilience, innovation and production of semiconductors in the EU, which is a very strategic component, as all of you know, in many strategically important goods, for instance, for the transition of the automotive industry. With the green transition being the other top priority during the Swedish presidency, we must do our utmost to make sure that companies that are instrumental to the green transition also stay in Europe and hear the very clear signal that Europe is open for business, and that we keep attracting green investments. More action is needed to be able to be the front runner of the green transition, and that takes me to point 3. We have all taken note of the US Inflation Reduction Act. I think that when it comes down to it, I find it positive that the US is transitioning into a fossil-free alternative in a fossil-free world. That is something to welcome. However, the IRA has clearly shown the importance of ensuring that the EU remains attractive for the green investments, while at the same time avoiding then a subsidy race. The recently amended state aid rules will play a significant role here. However, I think it is of utmost importance to limit state aid to address market failures and to maintain a level playing field within the EU. Securing private investments in innovative clean technologies is therefore key of the EU to maintain its position as the front runner of the global arena. And we, the ministers of the Council, must also provide the proper conditions for the industry. Currently, the Commission's proposal of a Net Zero Industry Act is being negotiated in the Council. We had a good discussion on that yesterday. The Act targets really strategic and critical areas to fast-track the achievements of the net zero goal set out by the heads of state. To secure EU's role as the front runner in the green transition, we need access to critical raw materials. In an unstable world, the EU cannot afford to be this much dependent on imports. Currently, the Critical Raw Materials Act is being negotiated in the Council, and the presidency is working hard. And by that, I mean really hard. It's a high tempo, especially given its politicians. I think also some of the entrepreneurs in the room would be proud of the high tempo. But our goal is to find an agreement in the Council by June, so before the summer break. That takes me to the 4th point of today, the new industrial revolution. In the 1880s, Sweden took a leap in its economic development with the construction of hydropower plants. Manpower was replaced by water power. Today, Sweden is experiencing a new industrial revolution where industries are investing massively in new technologies such as fossil-free steel and batteries. The electrification of industry and transport is expected to double our consumption of electricity by 2045. This requires massive investments in dispatchable power production. And is the availability of robust and fossil-free electricity supply at a competitive price. All of these ingredients needs to be together. And we've sort of summarized this in a slogan: all good sources are needed, all good powers unite, including then nuclear power, bioenergy, and wind power. We need them all. The production and infrastructure for distribution of electricity, hydrogen, synthetic fuels, and biofuels to the transport sector are all interlinked. How this will be put in place will influence our opportunities for an energy system that enables a fossil-free transport system. During the Swedish presidency, we've managed to finish crucial parts for the Fit for 55 package. This will have a big impact on reaching our climate and energy targets. We are also working hard with the negotiations in the Council on the revision of the electricity market design, with the objective of reaching a general approach before the end of June. And this brings me to the final point, long-term conditions for business. If European companies are to produce the necessary energy and manufacture the batteries, the electric trucks, and the fossil-free steel of the future, they need good conditions to compete. The combustion engine run on fossil fuels will soon be a thing of the past. Volvo is leading the transition in the most literal sense, with a bold vision to be fossil-free by 2040. As we are transitioning into a fossil-free transport sector, the automotive industry, of course, plays a vital role. You also make up an important part of the EU's economy and labor market. We must ensure that the collective picture of the requirements from various legal acts boils down to predictable conditions for the European industry to contribute to the high climate ambitions. Recharging and refueling infrastructure are central enabling conditions. The provisional political agreement between the Council and the European Parliament regarding the proposed alternative fuel infrastructure regulation, AFIR, lays the foundation for more of a coherent network of public charging stations for passenger cars and trucks throughout the EU. The European automotive industry has highlighted the need for policy coherence in legislation to create good conditions for the transition to electrification. The Swedish presidency has drawn special attention to the connection between the proposal of new Euro 7 standards and then CO2 emission standards for heavy-duty vehicles, for one example. We know that batteries will be a key technology, and securing access to batteries to the automotive industry will enable increased pace of electrification and the green transition. Therefore, the continued establishment and scaling up of the sustainable European battery industry and its production is central. In addition to reduced emissions from vehicles, new innovative collaborations between different companies and industry are also emerging, aiming at establishing fossil-free value chains. I know that automotive and steel industries are working very closely together to promote products and use of fossil-free steel, and I think that is just great. There is a new dawn in the horizon. We all have an important contribution to make. Today, I extend my hand to the automotive industry to make this transition. We must work together. Through partnership, complex challenges can be solved and risks can be shared. With the right preconditions, you can play a pivotal part in shaping a sustainable society, a society that will pass on to our children and our grandchildren in good spirits. So I pledge to do my part, and I'm very confident that you will do yours. Thank you so much for the partnership this far. Together, I think we can make sure that we make use of the future looking so bright. Thank you so much for listening in.
There we go. Minister, thank you very much for those thoughts. You mentioned during your speech that Europe needs to be open for business for green investments. We've seen the EU's response to the era. I wonder if there are other tangible steps that you would like to see Europe take that you think would send that message that Europe is open for business.
Well, first of all, I think we need to draw inspiration from the Americans. That is something I've tried to do during this spring, is to sell Europe. Because if you look at it in a positive way, basically what the Inflation Reduction Act is selling the American dream once again. And I'm here to sell the European dream. And it's still undisputably so that the European Union is the largest border-free economic area in the world. And that really is a great thing. Today, or this year, we are marking the celebration of the 30 years of the single market. During those 30 years, trade between our countries has doubled. Just imagine with the base that we have now, what we can provide for the next coming 30 years. But we need to stop focusing on what others are doing and just making sure that we are the best that we can be. And I think one of those important lessons that we are learning now is what I touched upon in my speech, making sure that we have legislation that is coherent and that really sets focus on the long end game. And I think the example of Euro 7 and also the CO2 proposals really is a great example of that, where sometimes you get so focused on here and now that you don't see the long steps, the really big revolutionizing technologies that are emerging, and that we are not paving enough way for that. But I've urged all of my colleagues to really do that homework and see what ends up, what's the total sum of all of the proposals that we are adding. Is it making Europe more attractive or less attractive? We always need to look at bottom line, big picture. So I think it's, for me, it's very much a question of protecting the core values that has made Europe attractive historically, protecting those values, but also then really challenging ourselves not to look at only this little detail, but the big picture and bottom line when you add everything together, and then making some very tough strategic decisions. And I think, for example, the answer to or the Net Zero Industry Act is one example, and the critical raw materials is another.
Perfect. Minister, thank you so much. We're going to be hearing from the Minister later on in the morning, but now please thank Minister Bush. Thank you. Well, we're delighted to be joined next by Charlotte Mattison, who is the policy advisor in the cabinet of Adina Valiant, the Commissioner for Transport, and she's going to bring us some thoughts from the Commissioner. Charlotte.
Thank you, Peter. Ladies and gentlemen, dear all. First, allow me to share the Commissioner regrets not to be here with you today. She is currently in Washington, and so she asked me to represent her here today, and I am honored to do so. Your focus today is transformation of mobility, ours too. Long term, the transformation must lead to 90% cut in transport emissions by 2050. This will enable climate neutrality by the same dates. Our commitments are set out, as you very well would know by now, I think, the European Green Deal, the European Climate Law, and our Sustainable and Smart Mobility Strategy. The shift to zero and low emission mobility is desirable as much as it is inevitable. And Russia's unjustified war against Ukraine has made an end to dependence on imported fossil fuels even more urgent. So we need to look at the transport system as a whole. All transport modes must become more sustainable, and really quickly now. We need to promote the most sustainable alternatives in an efficient and multimodal transport system, and put in place the right incentives to drive the transition. So in road transport, the transition to zero-emission powertrains and renewable and low-carbon fuels is rapidly gaining momentum. Over the past years, the transition, we've seen a very quick acceleration in the deployment of zero-emission vehicles on our roads. Roughly every 10th passenger car sold in the EU is already zero-emission. And the number of zero-emission buses on our streets has really seen a tenfold increase also in 5 years, the last ones. So zero-emission vans and lorries now are also becoming a much more common thing, in particular when we look at the last mile and urban logistics segments. and also heavier models dedicated to regional distribution are making headway into the market. Now, and we see them outside, long-haul battery electric and hydrogen models are also appearing on our roads. And this is good news. So we're currently setting up an ambitious legal framework that will accelerate this transition for transport and mobility in the EU. The co-legislators have recently agreed on a revision for CO2 standards for the cars and vans. We're not there for the heavy duties yet. Setting a 100% emission reduction target for 2035. Now, our Commission proposal for new CO2 emission performance standards for heavy-duty vehicles is also out. It foresees progressively more ambitious emission reduction targets for trucks and coaches, building up to a 90% reduction by 2040. It also sets a 100% zero-emission vehicles mandate for urban buses from 2030. For both light and heavy-duty vehicles, the progressive replacement of the internal combustion engine with zero-emission alternatives will continue and will gain momentum, so that by 2050, the largest share of vehicles in operation are zero-emission. Now, our proposal does, however, contain flexibility, as it mandates a 90% reduction by 2040. And given fleet renewal rates, it is clear that combustion engines will still also be with us for some time. This is why the revised Renewable Energy Directive increases our ambition on the renewable transport fuels. And it is also why the Commission has proposed the new Euro 7 standard and addresses light and heavy-duty vehicles together, going beyond the tailpipe emissions to cover brake and tire emissions, battery durability, and cost-effective solutions that improve emission performance of vehicles. Now, we know that some have concerns about the proposal. Let's look at it this way. The proposal would bring about significant health and environmental benefits for the EU citizens. It will also ensure that vehicle operation is future-proof when looking, for example, at tighter local air pollution requirements. Now, when we look at the expected increase of number of zero-emission vehicles on our roads, it is clear that we also need minimum sufficient infrastructure across the whole of the EU. This is particularly true for lorries, for which we are still far from a dense and user-friendly network of recharging and refueling infrastructure. And this is why the recently agreed alternative fuel infrastructure regulation and its binding targets will come into play. For lorries, we have distance-based targets along the TEN-T network already as of 2025 towards 2030, when we will have the full minimum coverage. In addition, all EU cities with over 100,000 inhabitants should have publicly accessible recharging options for lorries by 2025. The regulation will also ensure that the TEN-T core network and urban nodes are equipped with hydrogen refueling infrastructure by 2030. So it's important that we really have both. So we know that there is already significant market investment in infrastructure. For network sections with high demand, the market will be ready to invest. However, planning and permitting, particularly with regard to electricity grids, can be a real challenge. This is why the streamlining of planning and permitting, plus support for key strategic technology projects for fast recharging technologies, were included in the Commission's proposal for a Net Zero Industry Act. Next, the infrastructure rollout will need to include megawatt charging systems. This new charging standard is indispensable for long-distance road haul. The technical specifications are for this de facto agreed, and we are awaiting its adoption by international standardization organizations. Once adopted, we will swiftly make this standard a common technical specification also under the Alternative Fuel Infrastructure Regulation. Moreover, we're currently now in the process of discussing an EU-US approach to megawatt charging system standards. Alignment between the EU and the US on this MCS would ensure certainty for investors and make sure that there are no extra costs for EU lorries manufacturers when producing vehicles for the US markets, notably. And so we really hope that we can find a quick agreement on this. The work in the field of road transport also paves way for mega charging systems applications in other sectors, such as inland shipping, maritime, aviation, but also mining. But other areas remain in which we need additional initiatives to decarbonize freight transport, to close regulatory gaps and address regulatory shortcomings. For that aim, we're working on a greening freight policy package that we plan to publish now here before the summer. This will include the revision of the directive on the weights and dimensions, which will support the decarbonization of road freight transport by boosting the uptake of zero-emission vehicles and support the growth of intermodal transport by incentivizing and facilitating the use of road vehicles in intermodal operations. So we see now that the pieces are beginning to fall into place for the deployment of a sustainable transport and mobility network in Europe that meets the needs of our citizens and our businesses. But we cannot win this race against global warming and climate change alone. And we need the acceleration to take place globally. Vehicle manufacturers are key players, both in the European and the global context, and we very much welcome Volvo's commitments, leadership, and continuous support for the transition to zero-emission road transport. So with this, on behalf of Commissioner Vălean, thank you.
Well, we said we want to hear from voices from across the industry, and we're going to have it now. It is time for our panel discussion. As the chairs and tables are being put up on stage, let me tell you about who is going to come up. We are going to hear from Pascal Canfin, who's the chairman of the Environment Committee in the European Parliament, from Clara de la Tour, who's the Deputy Director General of DG Climate, from Anna Borg, who's the CEO of Vattenfall, from Martin Lundstedt again, the CEO of Volvo Group, from Oscar de Bock, the CEO of Supply Chain at DHL, and from Timo Kieha, who's the head of corporate lending for Northern Europe at the European Investment Bank. Please welcome them to the stage.
Clara, first.
Perfect. Pascal, good to see you.
Thank you very much. You are all now allowed to sit down, so that's okay.
Good.
So, I'm not, but that's fine. I'd like to get everybody's thoughts, just as an opening, really, of what the EU needs to do in order to try and speed up the transition. And if there are particular areas where you feel things either need to go faster or there needs to be better collaboration. We'll start at this end and work along.
Myself?
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
Good. Perfect. So thank you for this discussion. I would like to pick up on key words that I've heard this morning already. The first one is let's work together. I mean, it was from your deputy minister from Sweden. I mean, that's exactly the right strategy, and that's what we have been doing for all the green regulations. We have been working with the industry for the reform of the carbon market. We have been working with the car makers for the CO2 standards. We have been working with the car makers and the battery industry on the battery regulation, and so on and so on. And that's exactly what we are doing now also on the lorries, coach and buses standards. And that's very important because it's the only way to make things happen, both with ambition and being solutions-driven and technology-driven. That's the only way forward, and that's what we have been doing. And by the way, it's not your business, but if I share the big political picture, it's exactly what we are not able to do on the farming side of the Green Deal. It's interesting to compare what we are able to do in transport, in industry, in energy, and what we so far are not able to do with the farming side of the Green Deal. I stop there. Second element, second word I would like to build on is all the pieces are being put together. It's very important you have in mind the whole picture. The whole picture is not only CO2 standards, whether we talk about trucks or cars or Euro 7, and of course, and I insist on this, we need to make sure the two are consistent, and we will make sure in the negotiation that the two texts are consistent for your industry. It's an obvious condition for success. But also batteries, charging, net zero, critical raw material, and so on, because we work on all the value chain. And we started the Green Deal with the end of the value chain. And now we are moving upwards to cover all the value chain, starting with mining and refining and critical raw materials, and then transformation, and so on, up to the final buses, trucks or cars. And that's exactly what we need to do to have a comprehensive approach. So that's the recipe for success, and we are working very hard on it together, of course, with the member states in the Council.
Perfect, thank you. Clara.
Thank you. I must say that I subscribe every word of Mr. Calvin. It's true that going to climate neutrality needs the whole economy to participate, to contribute to that goal. And transport is a sector where you know that emissions are growing since the 90s. It's the whole single sector, I would say, whose emissions are higher than in 1990, contrary to the rest of the economy, whereas, you know, the average emissions have been diminishing. So it's very important that we invest in the transport sector. Mr. Canfin has referred to the regulations, you know, the 55, the CO2 standards have been mentioned several times. So we need a regulation which encourages all of us to make this change. This regulation cannot live alone, doesn't make sense on its own. You need a number of other things on which the Union is also supporting. We are supporting investments in technology, investments in research and innovation, you know, that we have the Horizon Europe program. We have the investment fund, which is very important, and which should remind ourselves that these are yieldings, these are revenues coming precisely from our carbon markets. So it's a good coupling of the regulation and the investment. And we also need, and Volvo knows that very well, new skills, because to build and to maintain the trucks, the fantastic trucks we've been seeing outside, you need different knowledge, you need different skills, you need different business models, the companies themselves, but all the value chain that are behind. So it's only by addressing all these different dimensions that we will succeed.
Thank you. Anna.
Yeah, I think that first and foremost, it's important to say that the green transition will not happen. It is happening here and now. It's not something that we're waiting for, and we're all running in the middle of it. And I think today's event is a very good example of that. In order for that to actually work at a pace that is needed, we're going to need a couple of things. On European level, I think it's going to be extremely important to ensure the fossil-free electricity needed in order to decarbonize most of the industries in Europe and globally. And in order to do that, we need much more fossil energy production. We need grids, and we need well-working, built-out supply chains. And here, the European Union can play an important role in order to provide the prerequisites for that. Secondly, all of us in all of industries need to be clear on where we are heading, as Martin said in the beginning, and make sure that we get there. In Vattenfall, we set out in 2014, we set out an aim, which is to enable a fossil-free living within one generation. That is not our sustainability strategy, it's our business strategy, and we have ever since then tailored our business around that. Reshaping our asset structure, the way that we work, and specifically the way that we also collaborate with our suppliers and our customers. And the collaboration across industries and sectors are going to be absolutely critical to be able to do this, because new business models are emerging. So we're doing that in a lot of sectors, in steel, in aviation, and in transportation. And with Volvo, we are cooperating in many different ways. But I mean, one aspect is that we are both engaged in the First Movers Coalition and cooperate also in the hybrid project around fossil-free steel, where Volvo was the first off-taker of the production of the steel from that pilot plant. And I know that you probably read a lot of press messages every morning, but I hope that you didn't miss the one about Vattenfall and Volvo today, because we have decided that we will build a new onshore wind farm. We will start now this summer and be ready by 2025. And Martin and Volvo will buy half of the output of that on a long-term agreement in order to enable decarbonization in the industry sector. So this is a lot of things happening at once, but don't wait for it. It's happening now.
Perfect. We're going to be hearing a little bit more about that partnership later on as well. Oscar, can we come to you next?
Yeah, so I can link to lots of things that have been said before, because if you look from a detailed perspective, what are the major headaches in order to get there, and where can Europe and our various partners help in this? The first thing is indeed capacity, and that is first obviously production capacity. We have about 30,000 electric vans, but only 30 heavy-duty electric vehicles for now. But I know Volvo is obviously working in partnership, we're working on that. But one of the elements which is really important for that is the infrastructure. And I always think that the role that Europe and also national governments can play is very much on the infrastructure side. Right? As companies, we will make sure that we make the right investments, we have the partnerships for that, but the infrastructure to make sure that we have the charging in order to be able to actually use the trucks around the globe, around Europe in an effective way is a very important element. Another element is, I would say, carbon pricing, and make sure that, therefore, we make those investments economically viable for all players, not only the big companies like DHL, but also our subcontractors who have obviously those vans. Which also links me to another point, which I think is interesting, which what we see in the US. Which is called Smart Way, which is a very simple way in which they measure the actual output of each truck in an independent, objective way. That also helps to then, from a competitive perspective, be able to actually measure that, and it stimulates also the way of operating. So those, for me, will be the elements that can definitely help to further drive and accelerate this process.
Perfect. Thank you. Timo.
Yep. Thank you, Peter. I fully agree with what already has been said until now. So I think it's a prerequisite for the transformation to take place that we have collaboration, we have access to raw materials, we have access to talent, and we have also smart regulation to support the transition. I would, as a representative of the bank, I would draw attention to finance and access to finance, which obviously is a critically important factor in implementing all this. The EU currently invests about 25% of the GDP in investments, and this level will have to go up, and therefore we will also need to support the investments in spite of the increased interest rate levels. So we need to make sure that there is access to all kinds of finance, and maybe in this context I would particularly draw attention to that many of the technologies and infrastructures that we want to set up are new or unproven, maybe not immediately profitable from day one, and therefore we need to cover the full spectrum of financial instruments, also not only focus on capital market access and the proven technologies and the proven infrastructures, but also to unproven financing, patient capital, risk capital, and also grants in cases where it's justified and necessary. So I think this is a critical element for us to be successful.
Thank you. Martin.
Thank you. As being the last one, I'm in high level of agreement with what has already been said here, but I would like to maybe talk about two things. First and foremost, the value chain, as has been said, and we do it, we are engineers. So we are doing it rather simple. I mean, we say energy, green energy, times infrastructure, times equipment, times TCO, times customer demand will make the transition happen. And it's times, because if any one of those are zero, or maybe some more elements, it will not happen, right? So and the good news is that if you look at these elements, we have the technology, we have the knowledge, we have actually showcases, but it's about really deploying at scale. And why is that important? And we can continue to discuss the different elements later here, and we have the experts even better placed than I am in the different parts of the value chain. but it's also about competitiveness. Because the reality is that when you talk about IRA and Europe, that is the hot topic now, I alluded to a number of other very successful and highly successful countries in the world. It is about getting the competitiveness with what are the overarching targets for a continent, region, a company, or whatever type of organization aligned. And we need to make sure that the transition into a green and fossil-free society will be a competitive move. So I often get the question about IRA in relation, will you invest in US? Of course I will invest in US. Not because of that, because I already have, for many different reasons, regional value chains. The question is, where will I or other companies or other actors invest first? Because the 2-3 years that come now will actually decide where innovation will happen, since innovation will not happen anymore in the respective companies in the different verticals, but actually along the value chain, as Anna alluded to, Oscar alluded to, we do it together, everyone alluded to here. And therefore, speed matters. And we are not speed enough. So we need to speed it up, we need to bring that clarity, because that will bring innovation. And that is far more important than state aid. So the enabling conditions in our book is really to make sure that the regulatory framework is coherent, it is aligned, and now I like it in a way, now when we have a number of files in Europe on the table at the same time, because that is the proof of the pudding, if they are aligned or not, and that we can discuss later. But then when it comes to competitiveness, in addition to that, we are celebrating the single market, and our Deputy Prime Minister, Ebba, she referred to that. That has been a fantastic achievement. By the way, as Euro norms also have been a fantastic achievement. In an incremental world, it was absolutely necessary. Now we are entering into a disruptive movement where we should change technology. But single market is one of the highest successes, but we have not concluded the single market. It's an ongoing evolution that we need to actually continue to address. The banking union needs to be further outlined, the capital markets and the whole capital markets union, the capital access, because the reality is that Europe is growing slower than the rest of the world. And in the long run, that will make us less relevant, whether we like it or not. And if we can utilize this moment in time now to really take the green transition as our moment in history, to step up competitiveness and also handing over a planet to coming generation. That is what we need to do, and be extremely pragmatic about the execution.
Brilliant, thank you. There's a huge amount in those opening answers to dig into. Clara and Pascal, I'd like to come back to both of you on something Martin just said there. Talked about slowing growth in Europe, particularly compared to other regions, and how you think about going for these ambitions quickly while keeping the ambitions, but keeping Europe's competitiveness.
You start?
I was precisely thinking about, listening about the industrial competitiveness. You had something very interesting. We have to see the coupling of this competitiveness with state aid. It's not only state aid. This is why we have this important project of common European interest, where you know these are real partnerships between industry, between member states, and possibly EU money. But yes, we will not succeed the transition, which is happening, if we don't have competitive industry. But we will not succeed the transition either if we don't have everybody on board. And there is something very important in transport in particular, where we need certainly competitiveness of the industry, but we need affordability of transport. And there we should not forget that, that we have vulnerable citizens, vulnerable actors, which need to be taken care of. So the competitiveness, the vulnerability, it all comes to the same thing. I mean, you can't just change one part of the system, you have to do everything. I was also thinking, this has been mentioned, of carbon pricing, and we know, Mr. Canfano knows very well, the difficult discussions that we have had. On the one hand, when the Commission proposed, let us put a price on the carbon for road emitted in road transport, namely, also in housing. But at the same time, let us make sure that some of these proceedings are there to make that these new transport modes, this new heating system for houses, are affordable for the citizens. So it's competitiveness, affordability, they are all part of the same coin.
And so how do you, I'm interested how you do that. Anna mentioned in her answer first movers. How do you get what we might politely call the last movers to move along with this at the same time as not affecting affordability?
Sorry, I didn't quite...
How do you get those who are slower to transition in order, without penalising the whole industry financially and penalising consumers financially?
That's a difficult one. I mean, this is why we have to put incentives in all the different places. We have to put incentives for changing behavior, incentives for innovation investment, because this is the book of the thing. I mean, if you don't innovate in sectors like this one, then you are dead. You can put all public support that you want, you will not get there. So it's it's realizing that either there is transition or there is no future. So these last movers, either they move or they will die.
Thank you. Pascal?
Well, first, as was said by the Deputy Prime Minister, the IRA is good news. I mean, what if we would be today, well, the US are lagging behind, they are doing nothing on decarbonization, we are the only one to act, and the very same that are criticizing the US today would be the one saying, well, what are we moving when the others aren't? So that's why it's good news. And I mean, last year will probably remain as the year where the global competition for the location of green technologies, existing ones and new ones, really started. I mean, for real, from PowerPoint to real investment technologies. I'm looking at the chief PowerPoint officer. So that's good news, because the only way to succeed. But of course, a race is on, a competition is on, we can win it, we can lose it. So that's why we need to react. But we can also see the IRA as a response to the Green Deal, because Green Deal started before the IRA. Then, looking at the IRA, the massive part of the IRA is related to investment that will take place in the US for the domestic market. For the domestic market, that's what you said. And so there is a lot of debate today about European companies or US companies or Asian companies choosing between the US and the EU. I think at the end of the day, as both domestic markets will move towards decarbonization, investments will take place in both locations. But you're right, it's a matter of speed. And speed means simplification. And that's where we are working a lot on simplification procedures for permitting, for renewables, but also for the whole value chain. For renewables, it's done, but also for battery production, for zero fossil steel production, and so on, to simplify. And then one message to the Commission is that the Commission is not, I would say, the first quality of the Commission is not to be simple. So please be more simple. You mentioned, for instance, the Innovation Fund. It's 50, 60, I can't remember, 50 billion euros. So it's not nothing. And these 50 billions are allocated with public tenders, which means that you don't have the predictability if you are going to get the money if you invest in XYZ technologies. And the beauty of IRA is a bit the amount, but it's vastly the simplicity and the predictability. You know you will get it if you invest in this. This equivalent does not exist in Europe. So that's why we need to reform the Innovation Fund to make it more predictable, and it's in your hands. That's why it was also important to reform the state aid, because you said it's not, state aid is not first, but we all know that in the final debate and for the location, at the end of the day, state aid matters as well. And there is a real change in the Commission. And then I would like to support this, that you started with a ex-ante analysis. Okay, what is the level of competition within the single market, more or less ignoring what happens outside. Now you completely shifted, where we look at the offer from the US and you are allowed to match it. It's not limited ex ante, it's nothing to do with the internal market competition. You have to match it, which is a real change, and it will be a game changer when public support will come to support allocation of investment. So we are not there yet. I mean, there are big changes still under discussion, like the reform of the Innovation Fund, the Sovereignty Fund, and so on and so on. But we are moving, that's at my guess, in the right direction.
Thank you. Clara, would you like to respond to any of the points there?
Just very quickly,
Yeah.
it is true. We are not. I mean, there are plenty of things that can be simplified in member states as well, by the way. But that doesn't take the responsibility from us. This being said, let us not forget that it is not easy to balance accountability and simplicity. So it's, and I agree, there are things that can be simplified. But let us not forget that we in the Commission are dealing with public money, and accountability is also very important.
Thank you. Pascal, you talked a lot there about innovation, and Martin talked earlier about the speed of innovation between Europe and the US. Oscar, I'd like to bring in you and then Anna on this point. How do you see Europe at the moment as a centre of innovation, as an attractive place to innovate versus other regions?
I think it is definitely an attractive place to innovate, but the point is that was made before is that the innovation comes with the stimulus of the investments to be made, right? And I think because I just wanted to quickly respond to that earlier point that was made about the competitiveness between yes, they're both domestic, but the money can only be invested once, right? And that's where the competitiveness I think comes in. And the other point that we were discussing earlier when we talk about innovation. Pretty soon you also get a scarcity of capacity, right? Pretty soon many of our customers will have to make the investments into alternative fuels, into alternative trucks, into alternative modes of transport. And then there will be a scarcity, which in a way is good news. But it will also mean that companies will have to decide if I just make a very simple example, I did just over breakfast this morning, if I can only get 2,000 new electric heavy duty trucks from Volvo, right, then I will have to decide where in the world I'm going to put them. And that obviously is decided by the competitiveness and where I can get the best out of that. And that's where I think it does become relevant if we want to in Europe be fast and make sure that the innovation stays here. Because to come back to your point, that will drive the innovation, and the market where those investments will be continued to be made is where the money for investments is. And one other point on innovation, I think the question you were asked about how do you make sure first movers. Yeah, I'm a strong believer that if we make sure that carbon is priced properly and that income is actually directly used for the innovation, then we stimulate in the right direction, and then we combine the two things, and it actually will drive the right behavior in the market, and it will drive innovation.
Fully agree.
Thank you. Anna.
Innovation is, of course, critical, and we see a lot of innovation in Europe. I think one of the factors that has been driving quite a lot of this innovation is actually the emission trading system. Because when you set a price on CO2, all of a sudden you change the relative competitiveness, and you've seen a lot of innovation and new business models sort of occurring around that. But I also think it's important to say that in order to be able to manage this race for competition or competitiveness and the climate challenge, we actually have technologies in order to do that already today. It's about how we apply those technologies and how we scale them. And that's probably where we have to start in order to get the speed that is needed. And I think that Martin and I talked about this before, because we're both Volvo and Vattenfall are founders of the First Movers Coalition, which is a global initiative about driving demand in a number of hard-to-abate sectors in order to showcase that the demand is there and therefore also spark the innovation around that. But maybe one last point, and that is also in relation to the speed that is needed, because we talked about that during the breakfast this morning, that steering works. Both Volvo and Vattenfall have the target to be CO2 neutral by 2040 and be in line with the 1.5 degree trajectory in the Paris Agreement. And if you start breaking that down into business steering, it becomes very specific and also very obvious what kind of timing race you are in. And I think we need to do the same on European level to sort of acknowledge that the interplay between European Union and industry development has never been bigger. And if we also think about the European Union a bit like a company and say, so what's the target? Where do we need to be 2040? And you start calculating backwards, you will realize one thing. We are late. So we need to speed up the scaling of these technologies and the supply chains needed to provide them now.
And Timo, I want to bring in you on this. How important do you think finance is in unlocking the innovation, extending the capacity, and speeding this up? And how are you seeing the finance environment at the moment?
I think I already said that finance, access to finance is key to all investment. And as I said, that we are not talking about only the one kind of investment, whether it's electricity generation, but it's also investments in new business models and investments in new technologies and demonstration projects and so forth. So we need the full spec. We need to cover the full spectrum. EIB plays a role in trying to solve the equation, but all resources should be mobilized and be available, and new brainstorming also is needed to cover the needs, and also maybe also in terms of innovation and what is actually needed. I think we have, of course, traditionally covered the full value chain in Europe by European actors, and we have been very progressive and leading edge in developing new things and deploying. And now I think it's also in this context, I would also say that yes, it is true, of course, when we talk about IRA, that we talk lots of where the investment is going to take place. But we also should not shy away of capitalizing on things that have been developed elsewhere and deploying them in Europe. So it may be that there is also new technologies that we have not developed but should be deployed here. And let's not hesitate. Let's also move on that front.
Now, I'm at the Financial Times, so I'm contractually obliged to ask a question about interest rates. Timo, we're coming as a world into a higher rate environment after a historically low rate period. Is that changing green finance you see relative to other areas of finance?
I don't think that we currently have observed the material difference of the greenium or the difference between traditional finance and green finance. But I would just also say that the increase of the interest rates effectively from zero rates to whatever 4%, 5%, it makes a big difference in terms of IRR of investments, the returns expected by the investors and so forth. So it is, of course, an additional hurdle that we have to overcome, which I think will not kind of go away in the short term, and we need to factor that in also in our calculations.
Is there any danger that it slows the transition, given a lot of these technologies don't tend to be wildly profitable at the outset?
As I said before, that especially when we look at the investment need, the aggregate investment need that needs to be invested in the transition, and we are not talking about only mobility, we are talking about energy system, we are talking about buildings, we are talking about industry. So the aggregate volume of investment needed is mind-boggling, effectively. And from that point of view, then you have the scale and impact of the interest rate. So I think you just cannot underestimate the impact of it and take whatever measures you can do to mitigate that.
Thank you. Anna, and then Martin.
Yeah, I think that cost of capital is, of course, one important factor when you make your investments. But I would say that in this case, it's even more important with long-term prerequisites that are there to stay. So you know what you're investing against. Because a lot of these investments, both in energy and in industry production, are very long-term. They are there for decades. So you need to know that it's reasonably sort of predictable. And it also needs to be reasonably standardized throughout Europe. And that's why I think that when we now see the development around the market model for energy, for example, it's very important that it's not deviating from one country to another. We've seen, which is understandable, it's been very difficult for many citizens to cope with the energy prices. So there is a a will or a desire to fix this, and it looks a bit different in different countries, and that's not going to be helpful. We need a European framework in order to incentivize these investments, because that's the only way to, in the long run, have affordable prices. The main problem is not that the prices are high, although that is a challenge in many regards, but the reason for that is that there is a huge gap between demand and supply. We lost almost 40% of the gas coming into Europe overnight, so there is a big gap between supply and demand. And until we bridge that gap by building new capacity, the prices will be high one way or another. And you know, it's better to move faster than slower then.
Great, thank you. Martin.
No, but just comment on the need and how the state of the nation is when it comes to financing, etc. First and foremost, I think it's important to have a good balance between risk and reward in the long run. And we have been living in an era that will not come back, obviously, where you don't have that right balance. And that is not good in the long run, because we have seen massive misdeployment of capital as well. We should not forget that. We have seen good deployment of capital for the real deal when it comes to technology, but we have seen massive misdeployment of capital, and that is not good in the long run. So that's number one. Number two, what I think is very important to acknowledge, and I just touched upon that in my introduction, to talk about how would we like the European balance sheet to look like. I remember in 2010, I was in London talking to a banker, and I mean, you remember that was just in the midst of the Great Recession, and they talked about our order intake, and that has been negative, and you know, it was this huge correction. But then after some sort of discussion, I asked the banker about their situation, and then he referred to their balance sheet in the following sense. He said, on the left side, nothing is right, and on the right side, nothing is left. And I think this is very important. It's a funny statement, but as a matter of fact, if we look at European investment levels, public and private together, actually, we are just above zero when it comes to investments minus depreciation. And in an era where we really need to step up when it comes to a new type of system, we cannot have that investment level. And that's the reason why we need to look at friends like Timo, but also the whole capital markets, together with both the private, because some of the investments, it's not to say, should we do a public investment? Because we have almost come to that situation in Europe where it's almost forbidden to talk about public investments. Obviously, the public sector also needs to make some of the platform investments. And the problem in Europe right now, well, problem, but I should say opportunity in Europe, is that of course we have the carrot on one side, and that is often sitting in the capitals then with the fiscal policies and the fiscal deployment, etc. And then we have the stick sitting on the Commission side, then deployed together with the trialogue. And that is a little bit of a problem, that the carrot and stick are not, they are not sitting in the same leverage, so to speak. So there I think we need to, in the longer run, that is of course more a structural and big discussion. We have some of them, and Pascal, you mentioned it well. I think the Innovation Fund is a good example of it, because that has been a try. And there we need to make sure that that can actually be deployed in a good and transparent and an efficient way. But the reality is, when we look at the number of the critical balance sheet and asset in Europe, we are actually lagging. And we need to recognize that. Take digital. That is an absolute must for the green transition in transportation, but in all sectors. The deployment of 5G is lagging massively in Europe in relation to our main competitors when it comes to the regional deployment of investments. And I think a reflection to be made there is that we still see that as an income source. Okay, we deploy the bandwidth and we have an auction. Instead of saying this is today's railways, the 5G network and the broadband outbuild are today's railways or hydropower station that Anna alluded to before. Because if we don't have that, it will not happen. But we still tend to see that as a source of income in the short run instead of a platform of imagination. And who are those important platforms and elements for Europe to be deployed, privately, publicly, or together, must be much more intentional than it is today.
Thank you. Pascal and then Clara, I'd like you both to respond to the thoughts there from Martin and also about the issue of the changes needed in the European financial system.
Well, if I may start, I would use the word de-risking as the key concept. Because as you said, I mean, you are taking new risk, technological one, investment-wise, and so on, and you need to make sure that there is stability in the long run. That's what you said. So we need to de-risk. The first way to de-risk is to act together. I mean, Vattenfall and Volvo is a good example because Volvo de-risked your investment and then you all de-risk the other investments, and at the end of the day, it's a cluster of de-risking. And there is it's much more optimal to act together than to act individually and then waiting for the other to act. So the first way to de-risk is to have this comprehensive approach and collective approach. That's exactly what we want to get with all what we have been doing with the Green Deal, with the regulations, and I wouldn't call regulation a stick, because regulation is also a way to provide you stable environments.
I agree. That's great.
Okay, so
it's a combination.
The stick is that. Usually you don't like the stick, you need the stable environment. So
I agree.
I wouldn't call it a stick. I wouldn't call it an enabler. And of course, you can have smart regulation, you can have crazy regulations, but it's at the end of the day an enabler. Second is about the way we address the way to de-risk investment through the financial regulation. And that's where, for instance, we created things that some of the business company, some part of the business company do not like. It's called taxonomy and CSRD, so extra financial reporting directive, precisely to have the same language, the same grammar. Because if you are a Swedish green investor, you want to invest in a green technology in Spain, and actually what is green in Sweden is not called green in Spain, there is no capital market union, there is no possibility to invest with the same language within the EU. So that's why we need to build this language. That's what we made the taxonomy, that's why we had the financial reporting directive, where by next year, all the large corporates will have to report on their transition plan. So explaining stakeholders, starting with, of course, with investors and the financing community, how they want to move from point A to 1.52 degrees on all the value chain with the investment needed and science-based. That will provide new data, new information to invest in the best way and to allocate the capital the best way. So that's what we did so far. And to conclude, we are now negotiating the capital requirement directive for banks, where, in a few months, I would say, for insurance companies, where we tried precisely to connect banking regulation and climate angle, precisely to speed up the reallocation of capital to green technologies from the banking sector.
Perfect, thank you. Clara.
There are indeed several factors. Taxonomy, certainly, that's an important one. This reporting directives. We have also all the instruments, financial instruments, InvestEU. We have their family of instruments, together with our colleagues from the investment bank, which are precisely aimed at de-risking the investments, either with guarantees or blending different types of finance. And we have as well, which we've been mentioning several times here, the carbon pricing, because carbon pricing is a signal, it's a signal to the market where we go. And this also reduces, as these ladies and gentlemen know better than myself, the decisions where they have to do investments. So it's always, as usual, a collection of different instruments that are needed to make sure that we all go in the same direction and we succeed.
Thank you. I'd like to pick up on something Anna said earlier when we talked about the technology being ready and what we have now as an issue of scaling. Martin, I'd like to bring you in this, and then Oscar. You obviously have technology that you are ready to scale, but equally there's still a lot of technology developments that have to happen as well. What's the most difficult or pressing of those, and how do you think you get there?
Should I start?
You start.
First and foremost, I have to say that we have talked a lot about, and Pascal, I have to recognize, I agree, it's a combination of stick and it should be enabling conditions, and many of those are. That's the reason why I referred also to the Euro norms as one of the success stories, as we knew it, specifically in an incremental technology like diesel or petrol or auto engines have been. I think that era is over now, but that is another discussion. But I fully agree. And they must be aligned and holistic and end-to-end. That is even more important than ever now. And when it comes to the scaling, I can say that what is interesting that we have not discussed, we discussed, Anna, you referred to the first mover coalition. That is one very good example of the demand signal. The other big movement that is happening is the science-based target initiative that I personally think has been a success. That initiative has been very important because that is about really going through your, as you know, your CO2 inventory as a company, and in particular scope 3. That is the real deal, and for us it's north of 90%, obviously, because it's products in use. What I like about that, apart from the fact that you have to disclose it publicly, you have to get it approved, and you have to set your targets, is that the corporate sector hate to lose, as you know. That is, so to speak, in the inherited nature of a company. And therefore, I mean, you won't sit in the boardroom or out in the departments and with the younger generation or whoever as a colleague and say, okay, we didn't make any progress this year either. So both for your own sake as a company, but in addition to that, in terms of your dealings with your upstream and downstream partners. And Oscar and myself, or all of us, we had a good discussion about that during the breakfast, how we see that our joint customers, your customers basically, but our customers then through Oscar, is actually demanding that because they have their science-based targets and they see that transport logistics is a very interesting part of the abatement curve. I mean, in terms of investments in relation to what CO2 reductions you can get. So this is creating an enormous level of dynamic, which is extremely positive. That is also creating both public and private carbon pricing, which is also very positive. Now, what is happening is obviously that people in these different verticals that we are serving would like to have peace of mind also. They want to have certainty. So the big story now is, when is the right timing to make the step? And obviously, we see, and I think Charlotte referred to it when it comes to public transport, but we see that in urban transportation, we see that in waste collection, we see it in regional haul, we see it in ports logistics, quarries coming now. We just press released yesterday, big deal with Holcim. So it's coming, and that's the reason why this is not an average deployment. It is a sector by sector, application by application, geography by geography, where you have actually the prerequisite to make it happen. But once the S-curve starts, it goes rather quickly, and that is positive. And that's the reason, again, why the coordinated effort is possible. We are maturing the value chains. Now, if you look at the heavy-duty battery electric out here, or medium-duty battery electric out here, they are in serial production. And they are used in the same industrial system as we have for the diesel-powered vehicles. You just have different fish bones going into the main line. Then we need to mature the value chains when it comes to all the upstream capacity, obviously, but we have the capacity to do it. Now it's more about, again, having this coordinated effort where our direct customers, but also their customers, have the confidence that, okay, going from having 10 or 15 or 25 or 50 units in a depot to move the whole depot over to being battery or fuel cell electric. So, but we see that happen, and we see also how the bottlenecks are getting more and more visible in terms of grid, in terms of that storage, and also charging arbitrage, etc., visibility of the energy pricing. But it's happening, and it's a very positive signal that we are getting from partners like Oscar, for example.
Yeah, maybe to build on your point and going back to what you were asking for. I think one point which is also very important is the whole transition solutions. We talk a lot about the ones that we're going to have, but also today we have those targets because to your point, we have those science-based targets. Our customers have these science-based targets. So that also means that also next year we need to reduce, and the year after. And that means that, for instance, biofuels, which is sort of the intermediate solution, is a very important one as well, and where we need to make sure that we continue to help the sector use biofuels. Now, one of the things, one is it's an investment not for the long term, but for coming 6 years. So we need to make sure that that's viable. And the other thing is the point was made earlier about the consistency in legislation, because there's certain HPO, for instance, you can have in the one country in Europe, but you cannot in the other. And so we need to make sure that, while obviously transport moves through Europe. So we need to make sure that we help the various biofuel solutions in that intermediate period until we have the capacity to really move to the advanced energy possibilities.
Thank you. Now, before we take questions from the floor, I'd like to ask each of you in turn what the one big challenge is, you think, what the biggest challenges that needs addressing, and maybe an idea for how that could be addressed. Maybe that's a bottleneck, maybe that's something else. Pascal, you're closest to me, so we'll start with you. What do you think is the one big thing that needs to change?
Sorry, I thought it was Martin.
Yes.
I would say, based on this discussion, is consistency, and I would say it's our first responsibility. Second is financing, and making sure that we keep on having this debate depolarized. I mean, as a politician, there are only two theories of change that I know. Either the one debate is polarized and you win by 51 against 49, okay, but you win or you lose. And you have plenty of debates that are polarized in our societies, and you have another way, which is, on the contrary, depolarizing, compromising, finding wine agreements, and moving forward. The first one is very mediatic, very unstable. The second one is not mediatic, but much more stable. And I think the transition needs the second one. And that's the main risk of the US, is that this climate debate is entirely polarized in the US. So what will happen to IRA next year? And we had the chance that so far, the climate debate in the European political context, with an S, is much less polarized than in the US. It's an asset we should be very careful about, and to keep it medium and long term.
Thank you. Clara.
I think the biggest challenge is to make sure that everybody understands that we have a climate urgency that we have to address, and that addressing this climate urgency is not only a burden, but it's an opportunity for business, it's an opportunity for better life for the citizens, it's an opportunity for having a better world. So, and that's the challenge, because there are some that understand, some that pretend that understand, and some others that do not want to understand. And that's, for me, the biggest challenge.
Thank you.
And I have to apologize because I have to leave you. I have to go somewhere else.
That's absolutely fine. Thank you very much.
I'm very sorry.
No, that's fine. Thank you so much for your time. Anna.
Well, I think that speed is the main challenge. There are so many aspects of transformation that needs to happen at once, and a lot of it is physical in terms of assets and building out infrastructure. So the speed is absolutely critical, and one aspect of that we haven't talked about that I hope someone will ask a question about is competence. The number of people that we're going to need in these industries with these competencies in order to be able to do this. And I think that the speed is very much connected to what we just heard, the sort of acceptance of all of this rebuilding, infrastructure, transformation, and acceptance of that change. And I think it's all our responsibility to talk about the business opportunities that this entails, but also the opportunities for the everyday life for people. Because it is perfectly possible to live a modern, comfortable life with an acceptable CO2 footprint. And we need to display that.
Perfect. Thank you. Oscar.
Yeah, mine would be very much capacity. Because if you, I won't bore you with the calculation, but if you would calculate through that all the heavy-duty trucks in Europe would be electric, there's no way at the moment that we have the capacity to have that with green energy. And as you know, if you do a green vehicle and you have traditional way of bringing the energy, then it actually has the opposite impact. So it is really important.
Traditional is fossil.
Yeah, exactly. So the point is, so this is obviously one thing where well, you play an important role, but I think Europe plays an important role in as well to really stimulate the acceleration of the capacity. Because with what we say today, I haven't seen yet the full solution to be able to have sufficient green energy to cover what we all would want to do.
Thank you. Timo.
Thank you. And I think I echo what Clara and Anna actually said. I wanted to actually also elaborate on the level of urgency. That is, I think, the key challenge to me. Again, linking to finance, I think investors typically are risk averse and want to see returns on the investment and want to see the whole setup and the framework in place to be able to invest and be comfortable with the returns that they expect. But this is not necessarily fully doable in this environment and with the ambitions that we have, and yet action needs to take place very soon, and therefore we have to focus on, and in many ways, what has already been said before, on the capacity to invest, making sure that we have the right skills, we have the materials, we have everything that we can do, and then use policies to promote and come up with investment to the extent possible. That's the only chance that we have. So we have to just keep on pushing and collaborate on this.
Thank you. Martin.
No, I think, I mean, of course, it goes about speed, and then maybe to take it to the next level about capacity, and maybe then to be even more concrete. I think it's about a number of, I mean, we have a lot of things to do ourselves, and that I can influence myself, so I will not take that up. But if I should have one ask that we can collaborate on, permitting, I think, is super important, because in order to get capacity, because capital is super important, but it goes together with the permitting process to really deploy it at scale. And given the timeline that Anna alluded to, it must be, of course, secure from a legislative and regulatory framework and all the different dimensions, but it goes too slowly today. So permitting in different dimensions is super key in order to make it happen, I think. The second, if I should have, a bigger ask that someone could fix, that I think is difficult, but to find the right type of mechanism for regional, but more importantly, in the long run, global pricing on carbon. We need to tax what making harm and not tax what is making good. And I think we need to get there at one point.
Perfect. Thank you. We have a few minutes for questions. If anyone in the room has a question, stick a hand up and we'll get a microphone to you. Who wants to be brave and go first? There we go, gentlemen.
Hi, good morning. Jakob from FGS Global Consultancy. So we talked today a lot about the affordability of the transformation. It was also a big topic for the Deputy Prime Minister. We've spoken about competitiveness, long-term competitiveness. And now, Martin, you've also touched on the taxes. And my question is opening a topic that we haven't addressed directly, and it's a topic that, Peter, you've written a lot about, and it's the rules of origin under the Trade and Cooperation Agreement with the UK. So my question to the panel, and I'm sad that Clara has already left us, is how does industry see the rules that are currently set and the tariffs that are to kick in from the 1st of January next year? And to the policymakers, sadly now it's only Pascal, if the EU is realizing the impact it will have on the European industry as well. Thank you.
It'll be nice one day to have a conference where Brexit does not feature. It'll happen one day.
But I think this is a very good and important question, actually, because the whole story, I don't know if you are aware of it, but I mean, there is this about, the rules of origin, meaning that if you don't have the right type of content, it will actually be deployed an extra tariff on, as it is of now, it is on the battery, I think, if I may. But as from 1st of January, the idea is that it will be on the complete vehicle in our case, or 10%, which in our book doesn't make any sense, because that is a little bit shooting ourselves in the foot, given the fact that what we want to do in Europe is to deploy at scale the technology, where UK is a super important trading partner, and therefore obviously to install that now with rather late incoming act on both raw material but also on batteries, whatever, I think is not wise. It will not foster the necessary investments that we will anyhow do. It will only actually delay the deployment of our cooperation when it comes to fossil-free solutions. So, yeah, I think it's a bad idea, basically. And it will not support the transition in Europe either.
Thank you very much. Gentleman here had a question.
Yeah, quick question. I mean, we focus on with Volvo trucks. So we make electric trucks for last mile urban goods delivery. So yeah, speed and capacity, that's absolutely key. So, I mean, the more Volvos and the more Voltas are there to make quickly as many electric or zero emission trucks as possible, that's absolutely key. And there are loads of 2030 targets on the EU level. Maybe, well, a question for Pascal Confin, but for anybody else. What do you think about a 2027 interim target for CO2 reduction of heavy-duty vehicles?
Well, for cars, we have targets before 2030. For trucks, we are a bit more long-term, but we will have this debate in the negotiations. But I think the maturity of the debate is more for 2030, 35, 40 for the trucks. And we will see, as you said, that will be part of the debate in the parliament. But what you said is that we need to give the advantage to the front runners. The main risk, and to be honest, well, I'm not at all talking for the companies here, but as a politician, as a member of the European Parliament, and same for, of course, ministers and for the Commission, we are in very close contact with a lot of companies. Sometimes we miss the front runner, because the front runner does not always come from the big ones. Sometimes it's a disruptive part, it's startups and so on. So we need as well to have a very good understanding of what is the front-running technologies available at scale, not just pioneering somewhere in the sky, but already to be deployed, so that we can be as ambitious as possible. And I have a good example with the battery regulation, because we changed the battery regulation after having discussed with the new players, like Verkor, for instance, and a Swedish company as well, that came to us and said, well, you, and to the Commission, you are not ambitious because you are too much business as usual, and we need something which is more disruptive. So that was a good lesson to draw, that we need, of course, to listen to the players already, I would say, the legacy players, if I take the airline picture, or comparison, but also the newcomers, and to be able to set the standards as ambitious as possible.
And just to repeat the point I was making earlier, you could do that, and I think it's a great idea. But then the capacity of green energy needs to be there just as much, because otherwise it won't work.
Perfect. Anna, and then Martin.
Oh, and I think that you are right that there are some disruptive moves needed as well. And in order to fuel these disruptive moves to fulfill these targets, there are a couple of things needed. I mean, the energy is one. And again, when we're talking about deploying existing technologies, it's not only the existing sort of electricity production. It is, of course, solar, onshore wind, offshore wind. It's the hydropower. It's also nuclear and the revival of nuclear we see. But it's about batteries, other storage solutions, flexibility, where we see a lot happening, but it needs to be scaled. And then it's the materials used in deploying these business models. And that's where the disruptive element comes in. And I would say that the fossil-free steel is one of those disruptive ones, sort of producing steel without coal, instead using green hydrogen produced from fossil-free electricity, which means that there is steel with virtually zero CO2 footprint that can be deployed in the cars and in the trucks, etc. Another example is, for example, aviation. We do a project together with Shell and Scandinavian Airlines using captured carbon from biomass-fired facilities and green hydrogen producing electrofuel. And that's another way of deploying already known technologies, but at a scale and pace in order to be able to reach the targets.
Perfect, thank you. Martin.
No, I mean, you talk about 2027. I don't think it will be a problem actually in the sectors that you're referring to. I think at that time cities will have deployed that well above what any political target should set anyhow by 2027 if we don't do it for these categories of vehicles. So even if we will set at 65%, I'm convinced that by 2027 in Europe, for the big cities, it will have a deployment rate of regional haul, urban distribution, waste collection, public transport buses, etc. That is way beyond that already. What I think, but on the other hand, I think you have a point. What is important is that we also get interim targets of other factors of the enabling conditions that are not there. Because the reality today is that we are sitting in a value chain that we have all discussed. And the only category that we have pointed out with possible penalties by 2030 is actually the vehicle. But if we talk about, and Clara I think referred about it very well here, talking about the accountability as one of the key factors in order to make it happen. We need to make sure that the risk and reward and the accountability is there. So agreed, and by the way, there are a number of targets already by 2025 and beyond. But I think it's super important that we continue to make sure that it is an aligned milestone journey, because if we are to deliver whatever will be on the table 2030, it cannot be hockey stick between quarter 2, 2029 and 2030. And again, it will be the S-curve adaptation of segments that you rightly were referring to.
Perfect. Thank you very much for your questions. We are out of time. Please thank the panel. Thank you.
Tack så mycket.
Now, Martin and Anna are going to remain on stage. So thank you to Pascal, Oscar, and Timo, who are going to leave us for this next section, which is called a fireside chat. Now, obviously, it wouldn't be environmentally friendly to have a real fire, so we don't have one of those. But we do have our great big LCD screen, and we are going to be rejoined as well by Ebba Busch, I believe virtually as well. So Martin and Anna, please come up, and if you take those two seats there, we'll then be able to see... Oh, there we go. Yep.
Vi kan inte förstå, eller? Stand up. Let's just do that.
There we go. Perfect. Minister, thank you so much for being back with us. I wonder, Minister, if I can start by asking you for your thoughts on what we've just heard in the panel discussion there.
Wow, it really was food for thought, and I think it also is a perfect example of how complex these issues really are. But for me, of course, I take with me the need for making sure that the decisions that we are making now, that they are coherent and that they are in line. But I also think that this, once again, is a great reminder that we are seeing now companies and enterprises, they are really the ones behind the wheel, sort of. There was a time and age where politics had to attend to companies and enterprises and saying, you need to get on board, you need to take part in fighting climate change, you need to be a part of the green transition, trying to convince companies to be a part of it. And now the tables really have turned. Now we see that it is companies showing that there is profitable models for actually making business and making money, which is not a bad thing, it's a good thing, and providing more job opportunities and strengthening competitiveness. It is them, it is you that are really now paving the way for the green transition and in many ways challenging politics and the policymakers. So that's what I take with me.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. I just want to ask you briefly about the Green Deal. I know this was a flagship policy for the Swedish presidency. You're coming towards the end of that. Are you satisfied with where it is? Is there anything else that you would have want to happen with it that hasn't happened yet?
Let's just say we're not done yet. So we have a few weeks left of the Swedish presidency. They will be defining, I think, for what grade we get for our 6 months chairing during a very special time for Europe as a whole, with war within Europe, with a very difficult economic situation, and then also the future looking so bright. If we can just find a way to navigate through this sort of economic winter, we will be able to tell our citizens that your children and your grandchildren will have an even better future than you yourselves have experienced during your lifetime. The future really is bright, but it is a very challenging time. And we have a few now crucial negotiation points that we are working at as we speak. And we really look forward to taking those over the finish lines and sort of seeing if we can dissolve some of the prestige knots that have been set in discussing, is it wind power, is it nuclear that is the way forward? We have those type of difficult debates in many areas, and I think that we now need to see the future is fossil-free, all good powers unite. And that is what we are striving for. And I think then it is possible to bring the whole of the union together and pushing the last crucial bits of Fit for 55 over the finish line as well.
And just briefly on something you said there about all the energy transition, what are your views on whether nuclear should play a role in that?
Definitely. And I think for me, it's very simple. Just do the math. If we are to make this green transition, and I'm not speaking then on behalf of Sweden, it's definitely true for Sweden, but for Europe as a whole. And if we are to do it with the tempo that the climate challenges needs, but also the tempo that our industry needs and the tempo that the job opportunities that could be created from this needs, then we need both wind power and nuclear. And it also is a matter of what the energy system as a whole needs, because the energy system needs to be robust. If we are to have enough electricity at a compatible price when it is needed and where it is needed at just the right time, the energy system is actually, it's quite fragile. Because you need to have the right amount every single second. The system needs to be balanced out. And if we have a good mix of different power sources, they have different strengths and weaknesses, and that gives a better system as a whole. And so what I've said that basically, if you want to sum up the policy that I'm pushing, is really showing the energy system a little bit more of care, loving, understanding. And that is what we are trying to push forward, and seeing that the grid system, the cables, they also need a little bit more care, loving, understanding. But I think we are seeing that shift. I have great respect for the countries saying that no, nuclear, that won't be anything for us. I have great respect for those that are saying that this is our main leg that we are pushing for. But I think if you do the math and if you look at physics that politics can't override, we need them all. All good powers unite if they're fossil free.
Thank you very much. It's very hard to argue with either maths or physics. That brings us very nicely onto the partnership, Martin and Anna, that you have launched today. Tell us about what it involves and what the driving thinking was behind it.
No, from our side, it was clear. I mean, we have alluded to that by 2040, all our products and services globally, which is a massive undertaking, is our target to really reach that fossil-free. And that means, of course, as I said, that the Scope 3 element is super important, but also continue to deliver on Scope 1 and Scope 2. And thereby, I mean, we've had already Ghent, for example, our biggest operations in Europe, has been fossil-free since 2008, thanks to, I mean, foresighted leaders in the Volvo Group before. but also we need to continue to do that journey, and that's the reason why we wanted to have long-term conditions. And it's actually evolving also from the type of partnerships that we are already having together in fossil-free steel. We have it in the First Mover Coalition. We have continued to discuss how can we further extend that type of cooperation with the visibility needed, but also to Ebba's point, I mean, then we can also together design systems that will be, because the reality that the energy system needs to be robust. And the reality is that I think the energy system has been, not at least in Sweden, but also in Europe, has been very robust, is a very good word, but it has not necessarily been the smartest system. And we need to continue to be even more smart to have this exact balance, because the reality is that as for transportation, by the way, is also not the smartest system, where we have still a lot of load factor upside to be made. And here is an example when we can have that long-term visibility together. We can provide certainty for the two parties, both when it comes to the capex investment, but also when it comes to future innovations in terms of storage capacity for this type of big investments. So it is about decarbonizing our entire value chain, and to do that in a way where we can trust that that really will happen.
Anna.
Yeah, and I think I would like to come back to the business opportunities that the transition actually entail. And I think that when you have the same view of where the market and the world is heading, and where you want to take your company, as Volvo and Vattenfall have, then it's fairly easy to find the ground for these partnerships. So that's also why we've been able to do quite a lot of things together over the years. And this is just one more step, I would say. And as Martin says, this new onshore wind farm that we're going to build in the south of Sweden. We've had a discussion on when and how can this enable the transition that we want to enable in also other sectors with our customers. And in this case, it's transportation. So it was quite easy to find a good discussion around the offtake of this onshore wind farm, providing stability on both ends, but also fueling this decarbonization of transportation that Volvo is in the forefront of.
I want to pick up on what Martin said about robustness, and I know, Minister, you picked up on this earlier this morning as well. You talked a little bit about the tensions at the moment, the Ukrainian conflict. I wonder if any of that has fed into a change in your thinking around the robustness of the energy system and the importance of security of supply in the energy transition.
Definitely. To be very frank, we've seen a weaponization of energy issues. It really has been used against the Ukrainian people, but it has also, in a very strategic and targeted way, Russia has made an attempt to use the energy system and the vulnerabilities that we have, the dependencies that we've had off of fossil sources. It has been used to try and split us and turn us against each other. But the result has been the exact opposite effect. It has made Europe more united, standing stronger together than ever, and it has really driven and accelerated the need for shifting away from fossil sources to fossil-free ones. But I think one shift that has come from this is the sense of urgency. So tempo. It has really been speeded up, and the need for making very strategic decisions together with companies and enterprises, looking at the type of example that we are seeing on stage now with Vattenfall and Volvo working together in a very concrete way. And that is what we've heard during this morning as well. Partnership really is the new type of leadership, and the leadership that will be able to dissolve many of the very difficult issues that we are facing at the moment.
Thank you. Martin.
No, but I think also I fully agree what the Deputy Prime Minister is saying here, and I think we need to take a step back also. We have lived through three and a half, about 3 extremely complicated years together. And of course, we can reflect upon it in a way where saying, okay, we have been showing a resilience that in some cases have been actually better than maybe we should have been anticipating 3 years ago. But also I think it's time to take a reflection point about, again, coming back to my story about the balance sheet, are we ahead of the curve when we think about what are the strategic elements of a resilient, competitive, innovative and forward-looking balance sheet for Europe when it comes to healthcare, when it comes to energy systems, when it comes to digital, when it comes to defense, when it comes to key strategic supply chains, where I think, I mean, it is also a lesson learned that some of them has been in reactive mood when things have happened, rather than being in a planning or a proactive mood before things are happening when it comes to resilience. And I think that is a lesson learned that not only, I mean, the policy makers and the decision makers on a national or regional level have to do, but also corporate leaders and other leaders have to do. And there I think it has been a lot of learnings. I think what we've learned about semiconductors and I don't know if you know, in a normal diesel powered truck, how many semiconductors there are in one of those. It's 1,750 approximately. And in a battery electric, I think it's plus 3,000. They're rather complex supply chains, right? Again, coming back to how do we think about these different platforms for future innovation and prosperity? And I think we are coming into an era of investments in CapEx in another shape and form. This is one example, but I think, Ebba, you alluded to a number of very important areas there. And I really like the way, if I may be somewhat giving support to the Swedish presidency, how you, and I got that feedback also during the weekend when I met with the European Roundtable Industrialists, where it was actually connected very strongly, feedback about the link between the green and the digital transition to the competitiveness also, because in the long run, if we want to have an inclusive agenda for everyone, we need to bring those things together.
Thank you. Hannah.
Yeah, and I think that, again, the business opportunities this entail, maybe we don't talk enough about that, also when it comes to displaying what the transition will mean, because there are tons of them. And yes, the way to fuel this transition is with a lot more fossil-free energy, and I completely agree that we need all fossil-free energy sources and all technologies around flexibility and storage that we can find. It's totally useless to discuss either or. We're going to need everything that we can get our hands on. But again, looking at deploying these sort of business opportunities, because there are a lot of them out there. And if we just imagine what it will mean for the consumer in the end in terms of cost, because sometimes I think we also exaggerate that fear. If you take a car and build it out of fossil-free steel instead of traditional steel, and still assume that it is this price premium on the fossil steel for a while longer, and if I buy a car, not a truck this time, but a car
it's
from...
okay.
It's okay, thank you. But for my own use, you know, the extra cost for the steel being fossil-free rather than fossil is equivalent to 2 USB sockets that I want to have in the car if I order them. So it's a doable business model. We just need to make sure that we make them fly sooner rather than later.
Perfect. Thank you very much. We only have a couple minutes left. I'd like to ask a question about skills, which is something we've kind of touched on a little bit earlier on. Minister, I'd like to go to you first. How are you thinking about the need to train up workers with these new skills and also transitioning the current workforce of a current skills base for the future as well?
Well, I think it's an old cliche that knowledge is power, but now it really will be defining for whether we are able to make this transition or not. And just looking at, for example, many of Vattenfall's projects around Europe and in many different places in the world. For example, with the windmill and the wind power, we are seeing such a dramatic shift in technology. We're also seeing that I mean, this is still quite a new technology. So there are still many big steps and an evolution to be made when it comes to wind power, for example. But then we also have to ask for those, for example, support systems that Anna mentioned earlier, which they are and could be able to provide for a robust energy system, but it has to be asked for and it has to be also paid for. We have to have a system that really values that. But I think that from a political leadership point of view, we need to talk to our kids. We need to tell them what skills are being asked for, where there is a place for them in the workforce, and make sure that that the incentives for really educating yourselves for what is being asked for, that those incentives are right. And we need to talk about this in a very concrete manner, country by country, but also for Europe as a whole.
Brilliant, thank you. We are out of time, I'm afraid. Minister Bush, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much, Anna, as well, and Martin. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me. If I could have high five you.
Tack, Anna.
Well, it is fascinating to hear not only how much many of our speakers agree with each other, but also how many things need to change as well in the transition. Everything from the energy system to finance, to carbon targets, to carbon pricing, all while keeping affordability key as well. And well, to give us his final thoughts before we run to the demonstrations and to tell us how those are going to work, please welcome back Martin.
Thank you. I will be very short. I will not even try to summarize. I think from time to time it's good not summarizing that, but leave everyone with your own reflections. I mean, we can talk about collaboration, that has been obvious. We hope that it has been at least a fruitful discussion about tangible opportunities for the future, and that is the most important, obviously. We know that, and I had a predecessor in the capacity of being president, CEO of the Volvo Group at the Stockholm event back in the days, in the beginning of the 70s, saying that transportation is part of the problem. But it's even more part of the solution, obviously, knowing the importance of transportation. We have seen that over the last 3 years. We understand, all of us that has been on stage, the importance of doing that, not at least for the European competitiveness, but also in order to hand over the planet in hopefully better shape for coming generations. So, having said that, thank you for coming. There will be plenty of opportunity to interact with all of us, to discuss and to see the different things live here. So, in order to do so, Lars, I always say that another predecessor, before the previous predecessor, P.G. Gyllenhammar, it was Gunnar Engellau. In the 60s, he said that I normally end these type of sessions by saying, and he said it very well, he said, I take the hat off for everything that has been achieved, I take my jacket off and roll up the sleeves for the future, and that is what you will do now. So I give it to you, Lars.
Thank you, Martin. And well, you have heard several times today, committed to the Paris Agreement. What does it mean? A running fleet that is completely fossil-free by 2050, meaning that if we would walk outside here 2050 together, every Volvo truck, bus, construction machine would be fossil-free. With 10 years in operation, approximately, 2050 turns into 2040 for us, and that's what the title is saying, 100% fossil-free out of the Volvo Group at the latest 2040. It is as simple as that. That is what is needed. When we started to discuss this a few years ago, one option was on the table to say, we will continue as in the past to rely on the internal combustion engine also forever, but then only running on renewable fossil-free fuel. But our conclusion was and is today that there will not be enough renewable fuels for combustion engines in order to decarbonize road sector and the infrastructure sector. For that reason, we are convinced that towards 2040, you will see the majority of the vehicles being electric, a mix between battery electric and fuel cell electric vehicles. But as this chart also indicates, we are true believers in combustion engines also in the long run. We are convinced that combustion engines running on renewable fuels play a very important role in certain applications in, let's say, in the very long run. We are talking about the three-pronged approach for propulsion technologies with these three technologies in parallel. Now time for some action. So outside here we have vehicles and we have experts and we are eager to show you some of the solutions that we are working on. So welcome to join me outside. Doors are there and there is a small door here to use as well. Let's meet outside there in just a few minutes.